Hi, everyone. It's Tessa.
And Joe.
From the Unveiling Paradise podcast.
Tessa, summer is almost here, and so many of our listeners are about to have their epic destination wedding.
And we are so excited for you guys.
Before the big day, guys, we want you to make sure you listen to these 3 episodes.
Episode 62, Deep Diving Your Wedding Ceremony.
Episode 53, Questions Your Wedding Guests Will Ask.
And episode 31, the final countdown to your wedding day.
And if you're planning your wedding here in Hawaii, hit us up and ask us about our Unveiling Paradise podcast promo.
Happy planning.
Welcome, everybody, to the Unveiling Paradise podcast show. I can't believe we are back in the studio. We took kind of like a big break, but here we are. Did you guys miss us? Did you miss the show? Are you thinking this is like a dead show?
I missed the show. It's been a long time, but we were busy.
We kind of hit the big procrastination button. We're like,
who do we blame? Do we have to blame someone? Or is it
blame me. Blame me. I'm the biggest procrastinator. I think we just got busy, right? We got so busy with so many amazing epic weddings that we just kind of got lost in that. And, I know that this has always been like a side pet project for us, that passion project, if you will, right? Here we are. We're back in the studio. You and I have had some really amazing weddings between our last recording and this recording.
So many great weddings. And I think that's kind of what kicked us in the butt to get started again. We have so many more stories, so many great ideas, so many topics that we were like, this has to go on our podcast. So here we are back in the studio.
Yeah. And it's really funny too, just like thinking about our podcast and our businesses. What I think I really love is photographing our listeners' weddings. Like, we've had a handful of diehards that listen to the show. They live and breathe and soak up all of our information, and then they have their weddings. These are so fun. And
they listen to the advice that we give, which is my favorite as a wedding planner. The fact that they are listening to what we say on the podcast, amazing.
Totally. And you and I have also had some really kind of unique experiences just because of the podcast. We've been asked to be the witnesses on the marriage license.
That was the first time for me as a vendor. I've done it before for my sister's wedding and my friends, but to do it as a vendor, as their wedding planner, because they love us, so fun.
Yeah, totally. And then I think also selfishly for you, you talk a lot about cake on the podcast. I feel like you're getting the lion's share of the leftover cakes at weddings.
I always get cake. The couples are so sweet. They're so good to us. They always have a little note on their timeline to make sure that the cake goes home with, their family, their friends, and a piece for Tessa.
So crazy.
Don't be jealous. You could ask for it too.
I guess that's how it works. I got to figure out my ask for all our listeners. I don't really have one.
Flowers.
I like flowers again. Give me flowers.
Flowers and candles.
Tips. I'll take tips. All right, well, let's get into our show. We are back with season 6. We have a lot of big things to talk about, a lot of big feelings about a lot of things. So today we are coming out of the gate with a very big topic. We're talking about money and just really talking about the financial realities of planning a modern wedding. And if you think about your parents, your grandparents' generation, do you know that in the 60s, weddings used to cost on an average $700 to put together? You can't get anything for $700 on your wedding day.
We can't even buy a pair of shoes for $700 anymore for your wedding.
Did you see, I think it was in 2024, there was the big, crazy, bougie wedding of the year. It was like $600 million. I think it was an Indian wedding. It was
spanned over 7 months. I couldn't stop watching it. Every time I turned on my news feed, there was more about this just unbelievable, over the top, epic wedding. They could not have done anything more. I think they had one of their ceremonies in front of the pyramids.
Yeah, just nuts. And they had all the celebrities. You had Justin Bieber. I don't know why.
Is that your celebrity? That's your
you had the Kardashians. You had pretty much every dignitary and every big, A-lister that was there. I saw pictures of Justin Bieber in a beat up white t-shirt at this wedding. I guess you can get away with that.
If you're Justin Bieber, you can get away with it, I guess.
But but that's that is fantasy for everyone else. That's not, multi-billionaire. But weddings are so much more expensive than they were during our parents' generation.
So funny story is, whenever I talk to couples that are local to Hawaii. Everyone has the same story. Their parents got married at a church. They had their dinner reception at the Hilton Hawaiian Village. It was a 9-course Chinese dinner, and it was $20 a head. You don't choose anything else. So you're not choosing chair covers. You're not picking, anything. It was a dinner for 500 people, and that was it. And if you talk to anyone's parents, that's exactly what the wedding was. So financially, it was a very different look. Granted, that was, 30, 40, 50 years ago. But when you come to now, it's not just that things have gotten more expensive. It's just things have gotten a lot more elaborate and complicated. And it's not a $600 million wedding, but you have more choices. You have so many choices. You can build a wedding from the ground up, from your venue to chairs to, what type of food to the type of plates and forks. So the amount of choices you have compared to what our parents had years ago is very, very different. And so those choices lead to more money, more expenses. And so I think that's what we want to talk about today.
I think the whole point of today's show is really to talk about the really true financial realities. I know, like, the whole hope of our podcast is to give you guys some helpful tips and tricks and things that we've seen work, obstacles we know you're going to run into, and how to handle them.
And it's also just acknowledging the fact that weddings are more expensive. I think a lot of it is that misunderstanding that, weddings are the same price as it was 20, 10, whatever years ago, and then they're not. It's okay. It's going in eyes wide open and being able to make informed decisions on how you want to plan your wedding. And I think that's kind of what this whole episode is about, right? It's the finances, what it actually costs, and then how do you manage that?
Okay, so we have a ton of great things to talk about today. So let's get into our show.
Welcome to Unveiling Paradise, your go-to destination wedding podcast. I'm Tessa, wedding planner and owner of Fred and Kate Events.
And I'm Joe, wedding and adventure photographer of Joseph Esser Photography. We are based in Hawaii, one of the biggest, most popular locations for destination weddings.
We want to share our real-life experiences with you, give you insight from a professional's perspective, and still make sure you're having fun in the process.
We're huge believers in the fact that planning a destination wedding can be one of the most amazing experiences, and we want to bring you along.
We're so excited to talk with you about weddings, Hawaii, and everything else under the sun.
So pack your bags and let's get started.
All right, welcome back, everyone, to the show. You and I get to talk a lot about the behind-the-scenes sort of realities of planning a wedding from start to finish. You'll share these stories of clients that you're meeting with. They have a $20,000 budget, they have 500 guests, and they want to do this, that, and the other. How do you even start a conversation based in reality, like current modern-day reality of costs of having a wedding?
Well, for $20,000, the hard thing is you really can't do much for 500 people. And so, one of the first things that I do when we're planning is to help them make financially responsible decisions and telling them, like, maybe we need to figure out a different plan. You have to cut guests, you have to increase expense or increase your budget, but it might be really hard if you want this Pinterest wedding for $20,000.
Is there any venue you could actually feed 500 people at for $20,000? Food,
the
drinks.
Beach, right?
No, you can't bring 500 people to the beach.
It's hard. I think it's hard. I never want to tell people no, but it's really kind of getting creative with how do you make that happen? I think whether or not you can do it is not the right question. It's how do you do it? And again, a lot of times it's how do you make that happen? Do we reduce your guest count? Do we, cut flowers? Do we cut your photographer? Like, what are those things? If you really, really want it, $20,000 in the whole scheme of someone's, income could be a lot of money. So I don't ever want to say no, but what do we need to do to make that happen?
Right. And I love that. And it's thinking through making those tough decisions. If we're going to try to feed 500 people, that eats your entire budget up. The venue cost and the food and drink, you're done. You don't get a photographer. You don't get a coordinator. You don't get any of those things.
Or do you just do a ceremony? So you make it very clear. It's like a 3 to 4 p.m. ceremony only. You want people to come and really watch you get married. You can have 500 people, but maybe you don't feed them. You have to state that up front. It's a 1-hour ceremony only, no food, no drinks, so people are going in fully aware. But if you want the bells and whistles of flowers, photography, a musician, you may have to sacrifice the party. So one of the biggest things of my job, when I talk to couples that are meeting with planners and they're trying to figure out, what they want, one thing that I tell all my clients, and I tell them throughout the whole planning process, is my job is to help you make informed decisions. And one of those decisions really comes to the reality of how much things cost. Funny story is I had a consult with a couple, maybe a year or two ago, and it's always cute because in the beginning, I always tell them like, do you have an idea of what your budget is? And they were very set on what their budget was. Do you have any ideas of your vision, your theme? And it's funny because a lot of couples, there's one person that's got a bigger opinion than the other. In this particular consult, it was the groom. He had very big ideas of florals. So he's sending me these pictures, we're on a call and it's these over the top, elaborate. I'm not sure if you guys have seen these gazebos and they're draped in wisterias and these florals and peonies and just everything. And it's over the top. Like, it's like Crazy Rich Asians on steroids. Like, just so much flower and so fun. And he's sending me just probably about 10 pictures, all same, just very over the top, like florals everywhere.
Yeah.
And so finally, I told him like, hey, these are gorgeous, but I have to tell you, like, the flowers alone are more than your entire wedding budget. And they didn't have a small wedding budget, but these flowers are, 100, 200,000. Like, it was massive and huge and on a larger scale than most weddings. And he was shocked. He's like,
I bet he was.
He was like, what? I told him, based on these flowers, like your floral budget is probably about $150,000.
Yeah.
And he was like, holy crap. He's like, no wonder I see all of these weddings. He's like, I've gone to so many of my friends' weddings and their wedding flowers are so lame and they're so small. And he's like, I see why now. So he just had no idea, So after that, it was kind of got it. Let's scale back the florals. Maybe it's not what he originally imagined. But again, once you start to understand the cost of everything, you can make an informed decision on where you want things to be.
And I think this is like the biggest problem is like we live and like breathe on social media. And like, you and I were just talking about this in the intro, that $600 million wedding. Of course, like everything looks amazing. Every direction you can turn, it's, dripping in gold and dripping in flowers and all this, all these beautiful accents. Like, that's not reality for anyone, really.
Really, yeah, no one but them.
But it's hard to like see that and say, I want that. How do I make that happen? And then you're like, oh, we got to talk about money.
And that's my job. I'm constantly, bringing it back and saying, okay, great. We all saw that celebrity wedding. That's not us. Or, even locally, there was a wedding and they kind of built ground up a beautiful glass structure at an outdoor venue. The wedding itself was probably $1 million wedding. Sure. It was all over social media. A lot of my couples shared that photo and they said, how can we do this? You know, and again, informed decisions, So for me, it's a breakdown of, we can do this, but this is what you need to do. It was a glass house. They had brought in air conditioning. They floored the whole thing. So, it was beautiful, but it's not what your typical couple can afford.
I heard it actually cost $300,000 just for that glass house to be shipped in. I think they brought it in from Texas. They built it. They rented the venue space for multiple days just so they could have it set up. Sure. It was not cheap.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when people see it on social media, it's that like, oh my God, I want that. It's exactly what I want. This is what I've dreamed of. And sometimes we have to figure out, how do we adjust our vision to make it work? I always tell people it's like buying a house, right? Or buying a car. You're spending a lot of money. You're going to pick the thing that checks off most of the boxes that make you happy. You may not get everything.
Right. I like that. Okay, so Tessa, elephant in the room. Why the hell are weddings so expensive? Like, let's talk about what are the realities that we are really dealing with when we're talking about trying to come up with the money to pay for our dream wedding. Like, what are we really having to take into account? Like, why are weddings so expensive? And I don't really want to talk about the P and the I, which is pandemic. We've all talked the pandemic to death, and the I, inflation. We don't need to talk about those things. We know that these are realities in every other aspect of our life. So we can, I think, put that to the side. And then, of course, like, we don't need to talk about all the crazy things happening politically with tariffs and global shifts and wars and all that stuff. Putting that all to the side, why are weddings so much more expensive now?
There's so many reasons why. I think we kind of hit it earlier with just social media, right? Everything is so visible. You have a level of showing off, right? You want your wedding to look good for everybody else. Funny thing is, when I'm helping couples with their weddings, a lot of it's their parents wanting to show off. They may have managed a very solid budget, they being the couple, and the parents will be like, this is not enough flour. You need to increase it, or you need more food, like my friends are coming. And so a lot of it is pressure from family and friends to increase the visibility and the overall scope of the wedding to make it impressive for their family and friends too. That's just one reason.
That's actually so interesting because there's so much pressure, right, to have this beautiful wedding that you're going to show to all your family and friends. And there's almost like that competition, right? Who can have the better wedding? Who can have the better photos? Who can have the better experience? What we were talking about earlier, there are so many more options than there ever have been before. So when you think about, like that traditional like Hawaii wedding where you don't get to choose anything versus now where you get to choose everything. And there's so much to choose from. And you want to have this epic event. Gosh, that's hard.
And that's another point, right? It's funny. I was talking to another couple the other day, and it was the couple and their parents. And the parents were saying, when we got married in Maui 20 something years ago, she's like, we signed with this one planner and they did everything for us. It was a package. It was, we had 10 of us. We did this. They gave us a bouquet. We didn't choose. It was just that. And, packages like that still exist, but you have the freedom and the flexibility now to pick whatever chair you want, what kind of arch, what type of flower. So many choices, which is a great thing, but also creates a level of complication. Do you want a $5 chair, a $20 chair, a $70 chair? And then your linen choices and what color tent and dance floor colors, so there's so many different options that cost more money.
And I think it's not just so many options. I think there's so many more options, more vendors that now you're deciding on. Do I want to have a photographer? I think that was a staple during our parents' generation. What about video? Well, maybe they had a videographer, maybe not. What about a social media content creator? Definitely didn't exist. I want all three of them.
Right.
And so, across the board, am I doing a bar? I'm having signature cocktails. Am I doing a dance floor, or is it like the cool LED light up dance floors with cold sparks? There's just so much to choose from. I think it's so easy to get lost in that space.
Oh, for sure. When I'm talking to couples, a lot of times as we're planning, they're like, is there anything else we're missing? And it's a tough question because what I will often tell couples, I'm like, if we stop planning right now, your wedding will go off perfectly. With that said, do you want a photo booth? Do you need a portrait lounge? Do you want a content creator, right? Like there's so many things. Do you want a calligrapher? There's so many things that you can add. It doesn't mean your wedding will be horrible without them, but do you want those additional touches? And again, there's so many more options, so many more add-ons, if you will, that just make your wedding day even better if you can afford them, if you want them, if you want to put them in your budget.
The other thing I want to point out too is I also have noticed, besides like the universe of vendors growing, of wedding vendors just kind of growing and expanding, also the wedding day has moved from it being maybe a small ceremony and reception to being really like more of a wedding week, right? So you plan all these other things. Of course, they have costs. So you maybe have a welcome dinner, welcome reception, maybe after the wedding, an after party, maybe after the wedding day, you might have a brunch with everyone. Weddings have become so much more of an experience, not just on the day, but just, especially for a lot of what we do in the destination world here, about that experience from start to finish. Of course, that costs a lot more money.
So a funny story that kind of ties into this is I went to my dentist this morning and I was talking to my dentist and he was talking about, he always asks about my work and weddings and whatnot. And he said, do you remember back in the days when weddings were, again, at the Hilton Hawaiian Village? And he's like, the couple knew about 20 people. Everyone else was your parents, family, friends, coworkers, right? It was never about you. I think what's really different now is weddings of today, couples are being very intentional with who they invite. These are their closest family, closest friends. And this is why, it became a multiple day celebration because they have finally gotten their closest friends and family together. They don't want to let that go. They're going to do the welcome dinners. They're going to do a rehearsal and then the rehearsal dinner. They're going to have a wedding all day with them. And let's be honest, the couple is never really spending the whole day with their family and friends. We're doing photos, we're doing, the program, whatnot. Like they're focused on other things. They're doing the post-wedding brunch. They're doing the boat cruises because they, again, have become a lot more intentional. Weddings are not just a showpiece when you get married to have your parents, family, and friends come. Like it is about the couple and their friend. It can also be their family's closest friends and families. But the weddings that I'm seeing, they've grown up with these family friends. They know them, right? You're not inviting random people that you have never met to your wedding anymore. And I love that about weddings now.
It's interesting too that I think the guest count has also become a lot less for that reason. So, I mean, again, if you have like 500 people at your welcome dinner, or 100 or 60, it really changes that vibe of just being more intimate and more intentional. If you invite everybody and their friends, it's a different experience.
Well, and it's a lot harder, I think, to budget for. If we're having, 3 days of events and the couple is hosting it all, it is going to cost a lot more money if it's a 500-person event for 3 days versus, again, 100 or something a lot smaller.
So, guys, if you're still with us on the podcast and you haven't run away,
I hope you didn't scare people. We want to help.
We do want to help. And actually, what I love, Tessa, actually, you have some really great tips. And I hear you say this all the time with our clients. And I think, it's also putting this in your brain at the same time you're trying to figure out budget.
Sure.
You want to have this epic wedding. You want to have everything. You want to have your social media content creator and your shiny disco dance floor.
And the disco balls.
I know they're so trendy right now. Everyone has disco balls at their wedding. I love it. Okay, so let's get into this. So if you're still with us, we haven't lost you. Let's talk about how do we manage this? We have to work with a budget. We don't want to get in debt from our wedding. If we get in debt, we want to get just a little bit in debt, not ruin our marriage over it. So let's talk about this. What are some of the tips that you hear yourself hitting on repeat with your couples?
So the funny thing is, whenever I'm on a call with one of my clients, someone on my team is always partnering with me. And they will always tease me because I don't hear myself saying these things, but they were like, oh, this is Tessa saying, like they're going to make a shirt for me. But one of the things that I say all the time is spend money on the things that are important to you. Don't spend money on the things that aren't. And I say that all the time. And what I mean by that is at the end of the day, when we're budgeting, you may not be able to have everything you want. But if there's something that's really important, focus your budget on that. And instead of just doing kind of a little of everything, don't get a mediocre photographer, little flower, crappy food. If something's very important, if you want that photographer, spend money on it. I did a wedding once where I don't know if you've heard of this, Joe, but it's called Out in the Field. So it's those really cool dining experiences. They have hundreds of people and they go all over the world. And they have this really, really long table of like 100, 200 people. And it's just this food fest. It's not cheap, but it's this really cool food and wine experience. They followed it for years and they've gone to a lot of these events. So they wanted to model their wedding off of that. And so what we did is they were so into the food, they spent a lot of money on food. We hired a restaurant to come. They were stoked for the menu. Wine pouring the whole night. 0 flowers. We had no flowers at all, not a single flower. She's like, I don't need it. We were at an outdoor venue. It was gorgeous. But she's like, I don't want to spend money on flowers. I want it to go to the food and wine. Like, this is really important. 0 regret. We've had coffee since then. They've come back to Hawaii a couple years after. And still to this day, they were like, that was the best decision, the best advice you gave us. Because they were trying to find a way to, have some flowers or a little. I'm like, if you don't care, and it's a family style meal where the food is all over the table anyway. I'm like, why are we getting flowers? You don't need it. And she loved it. For her money went towards the food, which was her biggest priority.
I love that. And I think that, you could probably go on for hours with all these different examples of things that people get caught up in the weeds and have to have this and they don't really need it or they don't really want it. And they're just falling into that trap. What I also want to say, and I think this is my tip, is also just like be grounded in reality with your budget. Like, what is your budget? But also, what is this wedding going to cost? You and I talk about this all the time. When you start planning with a coordinator, they are the very best resource to actually tell you, here's what a wedding costs. Here's what a wedding costs at this venue. Here are the costs of these different services. If you can make decisions based on that, you're going to set yourself up for success. If you have no idea what the wedding costs on Pinterest that you're seeing, how do you plan from there?
Right. And it's really interesting because what happens a lot, and I don't know, for anyone who's kind of perused my website, I have a lot of different galleries. And I have had couples, inquire, and they're like, well, how much was this wedding? How much was this wedding? It's hard for me to give them a number because you're looking at just the design. You're not looking at how much they spent on photo. You're not looking at their menu. Was it a buffet? Was it a 10-course plated? Did they have a 10-tier wedding cake of my dreams? I don't know. And so it's understanding, right, that the pictures on the website are just one part of the budget. When you work with a planner, our job is to kind of break it down and realistically say, this is what a budget is going to look like for the wedding that you want. Are you spending your money on food? Are you spending your money on a DJ, right? Even in those photos, you can't tell if he's hitting all of the right songs or playing like just really lame music. We don't know that by photos. So it's hard to tell. We can tell you design and decor, generally how much it'll cost. But if that's not your priority, then we're looking in the wrong place.
Yeah. And I think that's really important too when you think about just like starting with your venue. It's like, how much does this venue cost? Like in order to do what I want to do, like, is there more affordable alternative that would give me something similar? And like, I think wedding coordinators, wedding planners have all of those answers.
We know everything.
You know everything.
We know nothing. Maybe somewhere in between. If you know what a wedding is going to cost and this is your dream wedding, you have to plan accordingly. I have had couples push their weddings back a year so they can save more money. If you know that you're only going to be making X amount, or you can bring in this much or save this much, you have to plan accordingly. You have to understand that if this is my dream and I want this wedding and I want to spend X amount, I need 2-3 years. I've had couples. I have a couple getting married in 3 years because they know how much it's going to cost and they're not willing to compromise. So we are on a 3-year relationship with this couple to help them get their dream wedding. And it's exciting, but sometimes it does take time.
Yeah. And then also be really nice to your parents. You need to butter them up a little bit if you know that they're going to be contributing to your wedding. Like, don't be mean to your parents, guys.
And what I want to say to that is, yes, ask your parents, but, and this is always a little tricky, is you have to be clear with the number. Mm-hmm. I have seen many relationships with parents get a little sticky because parents have said, we're going to pay for the wedding, we're going to help you. What is that number? You have to realize your parents planned their weddings probably 30, 40 years ago. They weren't how much they cost now. So if they're thinking they're going to donate $1,000, they're thinking it's a generous donation to you. They're really going to help you. They don't realize that, it's barely going to scratch the surface. So having those very awkward conversations with your parents has to happen to make sure that you're setting both of you up. The last thing that I want is for people to feel mad at their parents because they didn't give them enough money, or that they felt like my parents promised to pay for my whole wedding, but if they didn't know it was a $100,000 wedding, is that really fair to your parents?
Right. Well, and it's actually really funny. The older generation, I always hear this at weddings where they're like, oh my gosh, like weddings are so different than they were when we got married. Or like, look at all the things that are happening at this wedding. Like none of this was available when we got married.
We had a wedding the other day and there's a live painter.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the, an elder couple was like, what is this? Why is this here? There's so many more, again, activations and these fun add-ons, but your parents may not realize that that's a trend or that's a thing right now. And they're like, what are we paying for it? A lot of times, once you kind of show your parents the numbers and explain to them where the cost is going, it makes sense. If not, I think sometimes it's just a little confusing for them.
Absolutely. I love that. That's a great tip.
Thank you. So to kind of bring it all back to, my famous saying, at the end of the day, weddings are expensive. We know that. How do you manage that? You spend money on things that you want to spend your money on, and don't spend on the things that you don't. It is very easy to get caught up in the fun of wedding planning. Putting small deposits down here and there doesn't hurt your bank account. Paying at the end does.
It does,
I have had couples who have gotten so excited and they're trying to book a photo booth, or they're trying to book, another art show or whatnot. And from the very beginning, when I'm talking to the couples, I'm like, you didn't want this. Like, you've never wanted this. And they're like, oh, you're right. We don't need it. Don't get it. You know, and I think it's always kind of going back to what are the things that are important to you. If you want the donut station, book the donut station. You know, if you don't want the late night snacks, don't get the late night snacks. Really just spend the money on the things that you want to spend your money on. That's going to be a really, really great way to help you manage the financial aspect of your wedding.
I love it. Spend money on the things you want. Don't spend money on the things you don't want. Seems simple, but you know, again, like when we're planning a wedding, it's so easy to get lost in the thunderstorm of social media and comparing your wedding to everyone else. Focus on what's important and what's not. I'm going to make you a t-shirt or a hat, maybe a hat and a t-shirt.
Thank you.
And with that, Tessa, it's a wrap. Are you so happy to be back in the studio?
I'm so happy. I felt like a little shaky at first, but we got it together, right? We're good.
I love it. Okay, perfect. So with that, welcome to season 6. We've got some great guests we're bringing on the show this season. So stay tuned and we will be back with you guys next time.
We'll see you soon. Bye.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Unveiling Paradise.
If you enjoy our show, please follow us and rate us on Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. It would really mean a lot.
And don't forget to also get on our mailing list and follow us on Instagram. Just do it already.
Until next time, this is Tessa.
And this is Joe.
And don't forget, your happily ever after
is just a plane ride away.